Consider for a moment what it means to witness something that fundamentally changes your understanding of reality. Not a gradual shift in perspective, but an instantaneous shattering of everything you thought you knew about the world. This is precisely what happened to a young man named Isaiah in the year 742 before Christ, in the magnificent Temple of Jerusalem. Picture, if you will, the temple itself. This was no modest place of worship, but a structure that commanded the landscape of ancient Jerusalem. Built from massive limestone blocks, each weighing several tons, the temple rose like a mountain crafted by human hands. Its walls gleamed with gold overlay, catching and reflecting the Mediterranean sun until the entire structure seemed to burn with inner fire. The air around it carried the constant fragrance of burning incense, frankincense from Arabia, myrrh from Ethiopia, aromatic woods from the cedars of Lebanon. This was the beating heart of Hebrew civilization, the place where heaven was believed to touch earth. Isaiah enters this sacred space as he has countless times before. Perhaps he is there for the daily sacrifice, or to join in the ritual prayers that mark the Hebrew calendar. He is, by all accounts, a man of education and privilege, NDAT, someone comfortable moving in the circles of Jerusalem's elite. His name means, "The Lord saves," though, on this particular day, he has no idea how profoundly his own life is about to be transformed. Then it happens. The veil between the visible and invisible worlds tears apart like fabric caught in a whirlwind. Above the mercy seat, where the presence of the Almighty is said to dwell, the air itself begins to shimmer and pulse with otherworldly energy. And then Isaiah sees them, the seraphim. These are not the gentle, harp-playing angels of popular imagination. These creatures burn with the intensity of living flames, each possessing 6 wings that beat with a rhythm that seems to shake the very foundations of existence. 2 wings cover their faces, for even these celestial beings cannot look directly upon the divine glory. 2 wings cover their feet in humble reverence. And with 2 wings, they fly, not merely moving through space, but dancing in patterns of worship that human language cannot adequately describe. Their voices, when they call to one another, create a sound unlike anything in the natural world. Imagine the rumble of thunder combined with the harmony of a perfectly tuned orchestra, magnified beyond all earthly comparison. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts," they cry, and with each repetition, the temple trembles. The massive stone pillars that have stood for centuries vibrate like tuning forks struck by an invisible hand. But this is only the beginning of what Isaiah experiences. Smoke begins to fill the sacred chambers, not the familiar smoke of burning sacrifices, but something far more mysterious. This smoke seems alive, moving with purpose, carrying within it the very essence of divine presence. It swirls through the courtyards and corridors, penetrating every corner of the temple complex until the entire structure becomes a cloud-wrapped mountain of encounter. In this moment, Isaiah understands with terrifying clarity that he is in the presence of absolute holiness. Not merely goodness or righteousness as humans understand these concepts, but holiness, complete otherness, purity beyond imagination, power that could speak universes into existence or reduce them to silence with a whisper. The gap between the human and the divine becomes not just visible but overwhelming. "Woe is me," Isaiah cries out, "for I am undone." These are not words of despair but of recognition. He sees himself as he truly is, a creature of dust and mortality standing before the source of all life and light. His lips, which have spoken words both noble and petty, seem contaminated by their very humanity. In the presence of perfect truth, every compromised moment of his existence becomes visible. Yet what follows transforms everything. One of the seraphim approaches, carrying in his hand a live coal taken from the altar of sacrifice. This is no ordinary ember, but fire sanctified by its proximity to the divine presence. The seraphim touches this coal to Isaiah's lips, and rather than burning them away, it purifies them. Your guilt is taken away, the seraphim declares, and your sin is forgiven. This single moment changes the trajectory of human history. Isaiah the comfortable citizen becomes Isaiah the prophet. The voice that was once concerned with ordinary matters now becomes a conduit for extraordinary revelations. When the voice of the Almighty asks, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" Isaiah responds without hesitation, "Here am I. Send me." But consider what Isaiah is volunteering for. The world of 742 before Christ is a world convulsing with violence and upheaval. The Assyrian Empire, centered in what we now call Iraq, has become the dominant superpower of the ancient Near East. Their military machine operates with ruthless efficiency, conquering nation after nation with tactics that inspire terror across the known world. They deport entire populations, scatter peoples across their vast territories, and leave behind only devastation and tribute-paying vassals. This Assyrian juggernaut advances westward like an unstoppable flood. Damascus falls. The northern kingdom of Israel trembles under siege. Samaria, Israel's capital, will endure a crushing 27-year blockade that reduces its population to starvation and cannibalism. And beyond Israel lies Judah, Isaiah's homeland, a tiny kingdom barely 60 miles from north to south, surrounded by enemies and caught between the colliding forces of empires. Into this world of international crisis, Isaiah must now speak words that will often sound like impossible dreams. He must stand before kings and counselors, telling them that their military alliances are futile, that their trust in Egyptian chariots and Assyrian diplomacy will prove worthless. He must proclaim that the God of Israel will preserve tiny Judah while mighty empires collapse into ruin. Imagine the courage this requires. In palace chambers where whispered words can mean the difference between favor and execution, Isaiah must deliver messages that challenge royal policy and contradict conventional wisdom. When King Ahaz considers forming an alliance with Assyria to protect against Syrian invasion, Isaiah warns that this partnership will become a noose around Judah's neck. When King Hezekiah later contemplates rebellion against Assyrian overlordship, Isaiah counsels patience and trust in divine deliverance rather than Egyptian military support. These are not merely religious platitudes, but geopolitical prophecies that will prove startlingly accurate across the decades of Isaiah's ministry. The northern kingdom of Israel, despite its larger population and stronger economy, will indeed vanish from history when Assyria finally conquers Samaria in 721 before Christ. Its people will be scattered across the Assyrian Empire, becoming the legendary lost tribes of Israel. Yet Judah survives. Against all odds, this tiny kingdom endures the Assyrian onslaught, watching empire after empire rise and fall while maintaining its identity and independence. The very survival of the Hebrew people, and through them the preservation of monotheistic faith that will eventually reshape human civilization, hangs on the courage of prophets like Isaiah who dare to speak divine truth into human crisis. But Isaiah's transformation in the temple involves more than just personal calling or political insight. Something fundamental shifts in his understanding of how the divine communicates with humanity. The visions that will flow from his renewed consciousness operate according to principles that transcend ordinary time and space. His prophecies will describe events with surgical precision centuries before they occur, as if the future has somehow become visible to his transformed perception. This phenomenon challenges our modern understanding of how information travels through time. Consider that Isaiah will speak of virgin birth, of suffering servants, of Messiah figures, with details so specific that critics will later argue his prophecies must have been written after the events they describe. Yet archaeological evidence consistently confirms that these texts existed in their current form long before the fulfillment they anticipate. What kind of consciousness can perceive patterns in history that span multiple centuries? How does a human mind gain access to information that exists beyond the normal flow of cause and effect? Isaiah's temple experience suggests that divine revelation operates as a form of communication that transcends the linear progression of time, allowing future events to cast shadows backward into present awareness. The seraphim themselves embody this transcendence of ordinary reality. Their 6 wings represent mastery over multiple dimensions of existence: the spiritual realm, where they cover their faces in reverence, the humble service, where they cover their feet in modesty, and the active ministry, where they use their remaining wings for flight and action. They demonstrate that true spiritual authority emerges not from human ambition, but from perfect integration of worship, humility, and purposeful movement. As Isaiah emerges from his temple encounter, he carries within his transformed consciousness the capacity to see divine patterns hidden within the chaos of human history. The Assyrian invasion that terrorizes his contemporaries becomes, in his prophetic vision, merely one movement in a vast symphony of divine purpose that stretches across millennia. He will spend the next 4 decades learning to translate these transcendent visions into human language, crafting poetry that captures eternal truths in temporal words. His ministry will span the reigns of 4 different kings, each presenting unique challenges that test his courage and refine his understanding of divine communication. The young man who entered the temple as a comfortable member of Jerusalem's elite exits as something far more dangerous, a prophet whose words will reshape kingdoms, inspire revolutionaries, comfort the oppressed, and provide blueprints for human transformation that remain relevant 27 centuries later. This is how heaven breaks through into human history, not through gradual enlightenment or philosophical reasoning, but through encounters so profound they shatter every assumption about what is possible. Isaiah's experience in the temple becomes the foundation for revelations that will echo through every generation that follows, offering hope to the hopeless and strength to those who dare to believe that divine purposes can triumph over human chaos. Tomorrow, we will explore how these transcendent visions took shape as poetry that defies the normal boundaries of time and space, creating prophecies that continue to astonish readers with their precision and power. From Isaiah's transformed consciousness now flows something extraordinary, poetry that seems to operate according to laws beyond ordinary human experience. These are not merely beautiful verses crafted by literary skill, but prophecies that pierce through the fabric of time itself, describing events with startling precision centuries before they unfold. Consider what this means. In the 8th century before Christ, while Assyrian armies march across the ancient world and human civilization struggles with Bronze Age technology, Isaiah begins to speak of realities that will not manifest for 700 years. His words paint scenes so vivid, so specific, that future generations will struggle to understand how such knowledge could exist in advance of its fulfillment. Let us follow the first of these remarkable visions as it emerges from Isaiah's renewed perception. Behold, he declares, "A virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." These words, spoken in the context of immediate political crisis, carry within them implications that stretch far beyond their original setting. The Hebrew word Alma, young woman or virgin, becomes a bridge connecting Isaiah's time to an event that will reshape human understanding of the divine relationship with creation. But notice how this prophecy functions. It operates simultaneously on multiple levels of meaning, addressing both immediate historical circumstances and distant future fulfillment. In Isaiah's time, the sign serves as assurance to King Ahaz that God's presence remains with Judah during the Syrian crisis. Yet the same words, when fulfilled in the birth narratives of the New Testament, reveal depths of meaning that could not have been fully comprehended by Isaiah's original audience. This is the hallmark of authentic prophetic consciousness, ACAC. the ability to perceive patterns that transcend the linear progression of historical time. Isaiah's visions access what we might call the deep structure of divine purpose, the underlying blueprint according to which human history unfolds across millennia. As his ministry develops, these temporal transcendences become increasingly remarkable. In chapters 42 through 53, Isaiah begins to describe a figure he calls simply the servant. This mysterious person emerges from his prophetic vision with biographical details so precise they read like historical narrative written in advance. He was despised and rejected by men, Isaiah writes, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. The Hebrew word makob, acquainted, suggests not casual familiarity but intimate, experiential knowledge. This servant will know suffering not as an observer, but as one who has absorbed it into the very fabric of his being. The description continues with surgical precision. He was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. Each phrase maps specific aspects of substitutionary suffering, wounds that heal others, punishment that brings peace, physical trauma that restores spiritual wholeness. Perhaps most remarkably, Isaiah describes the servant's death and burial with details that would prove prophetically accurate in every particular. They made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. This apparent contradiction, burial simultaneously with criminals and wealthy individuals, makes little sense in Isaiah's historical raison context. Yet it will prove to describe exactly the circumstances surrounding the crucifixion and burial of Jesus of Nazareth 7 centuries later. But how does such specific foreknowledge become possible? What mechanism allows information about future events to flow backward through time into present awareness? Isaiah's temple encounter suggests that divine revelation operates as a form of communication that transcends the normal boundaries of temporal sequence. The seraphim themselves offer clues about this transcendence. Their 6 wings represent mastery over multiple dimensions of existence simultaneously. They exist in a realm where past, present, and future convergence in eternal now, where events separated by centuries and human experience occur as simultaneous realities in divine perception. Isaiah's consciousness, transformed by direct encounter with these beings, gains access to this elevated perspective. He begins to see human history not as a linear progression of isolated events, but as a unified tapestry where patterns established in eternity work themselves out through temporal manifestation. This explains the remarkable coherence of his prophetic vision. The servant songs do not exist as isolated predictions, but as part of an integrated understanding of divine purpose that connects Isaiah's immediate historical moment to the ultimate fulfillment of God's redemptive plan for humanity. Consider, for instance, how Isaiah describes the servant's mission. He will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. This is leadership that operates through gentleness rather than force, power that strengthens the weak instead of overwhelming them. Such a vision contradicts everything Isaiah's contemporaries understand about effective authority. In their world, power means military might, political influence, and the ability to dominate opponents. Yet Isaiah sees a form of leadership that will prove more transformative than any earthly kingdom: authority that flows from sacrificial love rather than coercive. Strength. The prophet's vision extends beyond individual suffering to cosmic transformation. For behold, he declares, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind. This is not merely restoration of existing conditions, but fundamental recreation of reality itself. Isaiah perceives that the servant's sacrificial mission opens pathways to unprecedented transformation. The wolf will dwell with the lamb, The leopard will lie down with the young goat, and a little child will lead them. These images transcend mere metaphor, pointing toward actual restoration of creation's original harmony. The earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Consider what this means. Just as water molecules permeate every cubic inch of ocean space, divine knowledge will saturate every aspect of human existence. This represents an information revolution, where wisdom becomes as accessible as breathing, where understanding of divine purpose flows as naturally as rivers seeking the sea. But Isaiah's visions encompass not only ultimate restoration, but also the challenging process by which transformation occurs. His prophecies map the journey of redemption with unflinching honesty about its cost. The servant must first be cut off from the land of the living before his mission can succeed. Death becomes the doorway through which life conquers death itself. This paradox, victory through apparent defeat, resurrection through sacrifice, emerges as the central pattern governing divine intervention in human history. Isaiah sees that true transformation cannot be imposed from the outside, but must emerge from within through voluntary surrender to redemptive purpose. His poetry captures this mystery in language that resonates across cultural boundaries. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. The Hebrew word nasa, borne or carried, suggests not merely sympathetic understanding but actual transference of burden from one person to another. This concept of substitutionary bearing will prove revolutionary in human understanding of justice and mercy. Instead of punishment simply falling upon wrongdoers, Isaiah envisions a mechanism by which the innocent can voluntarily absorb the consequences of others' actions, transforming the entire moral economy through sacrificial love. The precision of these prophecies becomes even more remarkable when we consider their original context. Isaiah speaks these words while Jerusalem remains under constant threat of foreign invasion. His immediate audience includes kings desperate for military solutions and citizens terrified of approaching armies. Yet his prophetic consciousness perceives beyond immediate crisis to ultimate resolution. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign, he declares to King Ahaz during the Syrian crisis. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. This promise, delivered in the face of overwhelming military threat, proclaims that divine presence will manifest in human form to address humanity's deepest needs. The name Emmanuel itself carries profound implications. Not God for us or God above us, but God with us. Divine presence entering directly into human experience, sharing our condition, understanding our struggles from within, rather than merely observing from transcendent distance. Isaiah's visions also reveal the global scope of divine purpose. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. This is not Hebrew nationalism, but universal vision, all peoples streaming toward divine wisdom, learning the ways of peace, transforming their weapons into agricultural tools. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. These words, carved into the walls of the United Nations building, express Isaiah's vision of human civilization finally achieving its highest potential through alignment with divine purpose. But perhaps most remarkably, Isaiah perceives that this transformation will occur not through gradual evolution, but through specific historical intervention. The servant's mission represents a precise moment when eternal purposes intersect with temporal reality, creating possibilities that did not exist before. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Here, Isaiah describes resurrection, life continuing beyond death, purpose fulfilled through apparent failure, victory emerging from the depths of defeat. This vision challenges every assumption about how divine power operates in human history. Instead of not overwhelming force that sweeps away opposition, Isaiah sees gentle strength that transforms from within. Instead of external imposition of divine will, he perceives internal regeneration that makes voluntary cooperation possible. As these visions flow through Isaiah's transformed consciousness across 4 decades of ministry, they create an interconnected web of prophecy that reveals divine patterns hidden within the apparent chaos of human events. Each vision builds upon previous revelations, deepening understanding while maintaining perfect consistency with the overarching purpose of cosmic redemption. The prophet himself seems amazed by what he sees. "Who has believed our report?" he asks. "And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" Even as he proclaims these visions, Isaiah recognizes their revolutionary nature, their challenge to conventional understanding of how divine intervention occurs. Yet the visions prove self-authenticating across centuries of fulfillment. Their precision, their coherence, their transformative power when applied to human experience. Isaiah all confirm that Isaiah's transformed consciousness gained access to information that transcends ordinary temporal boundaries. Tomorrow, we will explore how these remarkable prophecies were preserved across 25 centuries of human history, surviving empires, conquests, and cultural upheavals to reach modern readers with their original power intact. The preservation of Isaiah's prophecies across 25 centuries represents one of humanity's most remarkable achievements in information conservation. Consider the magnitude of this accomplishment. Tene, maintaining textual accuracy through the rise and fall of empires, the scattering of peoples, and the transformation of languages, all while copying manuscripts entirely by hand. Picture the meticulous process by which this preservation occurred. In scriptoriums throughout the ancient world, dedicated scribes approached their work with religious devotion that bordered on scientific precision. Each letter had to be copied exactly, each word's spacing measured carefully, each line counted and verified before proceeding to the next section. The Hebrew scribes, known as Masoretes, developed protocols that would make modern quality control specialists envious of their thoroughness. Before beginning work on a sacred text, a scribe would ritually wash his hands and purify his writing instruments. The parchment itself, carefully prepared sheepskin or goatskin, underwent treatment processes that could take months to complete properly. When preparing to write the divine name, the scribe would stop, wash again, and change to a freshly cleaned pen. Some traditions required that the entire scroll be destroyed if even a single letter of God's name was written incorrectly. This was not mere superstition, but recognition that they were handling information of cosmic significance. Consider the mathematical precision they applied. To verification, each page was counted, each column measured, each line enumerated. The scribes calculated the exact middle letter of entire books, ensuring that copies maintained not only textual accuracy, but also structural integrity. They knew, for instance, that the middle letter of the Hebrew Bible's text fell precisely in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 42. The iron-based inks they used were formulated to last millennia without fading. Made from oak galls, iron sulfate, and gum arabic, these inks bonded with the parchment fibers in ways that made the text virtually permanent. Archaeological analysis of ancient manuscripts reveals that many retain their original clarity after 2,000 years of storage in desert caves. But the most remarkable aspect of this preservation process was its distributed nature. No single location controlled the copying and transmission of Isaiah's text. Instead, Jewish communities scattered across the Mediterranean world, the Middle East, and eventually throughout Europe and North Africa, all maintained their own manuscript traditions. This redundancy created a preservation system more robust than any single institution could have achieved. When the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem in 586 before Christ, carrying thousands of Jews into exile, they inadvertently ensured that Hebrew manuscripts would be copied and preserved in multiple geographic locations. The exile, intended to erase Jewish cultural identity, instead spread Hebrew literacy across the ancient world. During the Persian period, when Jews were permitted to return to Jerusalem, some remained in Babylon while others resettled in Judea. Both communities continued copying and studying Isaiah's prophecies, creating parallel manuscript traditions that would serve as cross-references for maintaining textual accuracy across centuries. The Greek translation of Hebrew scriptures, known as the Septuagint, and completed around 250 before Christ, provides another layer of verification. When scholars compare the Greek translations of Isaiah with Hebrew manuscripts copied centuries later, they find remarkable consistency, confirming that the Hebrew text remained stable across time and geography. But perhaps the most dramatic confirmation of this preservation accuracy came with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. Picture this moment: Bedouin shepherds following a lost goat through the rocky cliffs near Qumran stumble upon clay jars hidden in desert caves. Inside these jars, wrapped in linen and preserved by the arid climate, they find manuscripts that will revolutionize our understanding of ancient textual transmission. Among these discoveries, the Great Isaiah Scroll stands as a monument to the fidelity of Hebrew scribal tradition. Copied around 125 before Christ, this complete scroll of Isaiah predates any previously known Hebrew manuscript by over 1,000 years. When scholars compare its text with medieval Hebrew manuscripts copied a millennium later, they find 99% agreement. Think about what this means. Across more than 1,000 years of hand copying, through the destruction of Jerusalem, the dispersion of Jewish communities, the rise of Christianity, the expansion of Islam, and countless political upheavals, the text of Isaiah remained essentially unchanged. The few variations that do exist are primarily matters of spelling or grammar that do not affect meaning. This level of preservation accuracy exceeds that of any other ancient text by several orders of magnitude. Classical works like Homer's Iliad or Plato's dialogues exist in manuscripts that differ significantly from copy to copy, with variations accumulating over time. Yet Isaiah's prophecies, copied across 25 centuries by communities, often isolated from one another, maintain virtually identical content. The mechanisms that made this possible reveal sophisticated understanding of information preservation principles. Hebrew scribal schools developed standardized letter forms that remained consistent across regions and centuries. They established counting procedures that caught copying errors before they could propagate to subsequent manuscripts. They created peer review processes where multiple scribes checked each other's work. Most importantly, they cultivated a reverence for textual accuracy that made deliberate alteration virtually unthinkable. Unlike Greek and Roman copyists, who often felt free to improve or update classical texts, Hebrew scribes approached biblical manuscripts as sacred trusts that must be transmitted exactly as received. The survival of these manuscripts through specific historical crises demonstrates the resilience of distributed preservation systems. When Roman legions destroyed Jerusalem in 70 of the Common Era, manuscript collections were already safely distributed throughout Jewish communities in Babylon, Alexandria, Rome, and dozens of other cities. During the medieval period, when Christian authorities often confiscated and burned Hebrew manuscripts, Jewish communities had developed sophisticated hiding and recovery protocols. Manuscripts were concealed in false walls, buried in cemeteries, and hidden in caves, ensuring that textual traditions could survive even systematic persecution. The invention of printing in the 15th century finally ended the manuscript era, but not before scribal traditions had successfully preserved Isaiah's prophecies through 25 centuries of hand copying. The first printed Hebrew Bible, published in 1544, was based on manuscript traditions that traced their lineage back to the ancient scriptoriums of Jerusalem and Babylon. Consider the human dedication this preservation required. Thousands of scribes across dozens of generations devoted their lives to copying these texts. Each scribe knew that his work would outlast his lifetime, contributing to an unbroken chain of transmission that connected Isaiah's original prophecies to future readers yet unborn. They worked by candlelight and oil lamp, straining their eyes over parchment pages, forming each letter with careful precision. They endured persecution, exile, and economic hardship, yet maintained their commitment to textual accuracy. Many died before completing their manuscripts, passing their unfinished work to successors who would continue the copying process. The economic cost of this preservation was enormous. Parchment was expensive, requiring the skins of entire flocks for a single complete Bible. Ink and writing materials consumed significant resources. Scribal training took years to complete, yet Jewish communities prioritized these expenditures, recognizing that their cultural and spiritual survival depended on maintaining access to their foundational texts. The language preservation aspect presents another remarkable achievement. Biblical Hebrew ceased to be a spoken language after the Babylonian exile, surviving only as a liturgical and scholarly tongue. Yet Hebrew scribes maintained their ability to copy Hebrew texts accurately across centuries when the language was essentially dead for everyday communication. This required establishing Hebrew schools in every major Jewish community, teaching Hebrew grammar and vocabulary to students who spoke Aramaic, Greek, Latin, or Arabic in their daily lives. The Hebrew language survived only because it was embedded within the biblical texts that communities were determined to preserve. The vocalization system added to Hebrew texts during the medieval period represents another preservation innovation. Since ancient Hebrew was written without vowels, correct pronunciation could be lost over time. The Masoretes developed a system of dots and dashes placed above and below consonants to preserve traditional pronunciation, ensuring that the oral tradition of Hebrew reading would not be forgotten. Carbon dating and chemical analysis of Dead Sea manuscripts confirm that ancient preservation techniques were remarkably effective. Parchments remain flexible after 2 millennia. Inks retain their original composition and color. The storage methods used by ancient communities, wrapping scrolls in linen, sealing them in clay jars, hiding them in dry caves, created optimal conditions for long-term preservation. When we read Isaiah's prophecies today, we encounter words that have been transmitted with extraordinary fidelity across one of the longest periods of textual preservation in human history. The English translations we use are based on Hebrew manuscripts that differ only minimally from texts copied 2,000 years ago in the caves of Qumran. This preservation achievement becomes even more remarkable when we consider that Isaiah's prophecies contain some of Hebrew literature's most complex poetry, with intricate wordplay, multiple layers of meaning, and sophisticated literary structures that would make copying errors particularly likely. Yet the textual tradition maintained not only the basic content, but also the subtle artistic elements that make Isaiah's writing so powerful. Tomorrow, we will explore how these carefully preserved prophecies ignited transformation across cultures and centuries, becoming foundational texts for movements that reshaped human civilization and continue inspiring hope in our contemporary world. Isaiah's words, preserved with such extraordinary care across millennia, did not remain merely museum artifacts or academic curiosities. Instead, they became catalysts for transformation that reshaped human civilization in ways the ancient prophet could never have imagined. Like seeds carried by wind across vast distances, these prophecies took root in diverse cultures, each generation discovering new depths of meaning that spoke directly to their circumstances. The most pivotal moment in this transformative journey occurred in a small synagogue in Nazareth, approximately 700 years after Isaiah first received his temple vision. Picture the scene. Jesus of Nazareth, a young rabbi beginning his public ministry, stands before the assembled community on the Sabbath day. The synagogue attendant hands him the scroll of Isaiah, and he unrolls it to chapter 61. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." Jesus reads aloud, "Because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." The words themselves are familiar to everyone present. They have heard these prophecies countless times, understanding them as promises about a future messianic age when God would restore Israel's fortunes and establish justice throughout the earth. But what happens next changes everything. Jesus closes the scroll, hands it back to the attendant, and sits down. In the pregnant silence that follows, with every eye fixed upon him, he speaks words that will echo through history. Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Consider the revolutionary nature of this claim. Jesus is not merely interpreting Isaiah's prophecy or applying it metaphorically to contemporary circumstances. He is declaring that the ancient words have found their intended target, that the mysterious timeline connecting Isaiah's vision to future fulfillment has reached its appointed moment. The immediate response reveals the shocking nature of this declaration. Initial amazement gives way to outrage as the implications sink in. The congregation attempts to throw Jesus off a cliff, recognizing that his claim represents either divine revelation or dangerous blasphemy, with no middle ground between these possibilities. But this moment in Nazareth becomes the launching point for a transformation that will eventually encompass the entire world. Isaiah's prophecies about the suffering servant, the Prince of Peace, and the one who brings good news to the oppressed suddenly acquire concrete historical reference points that validate their supernatural origin while demonstrating their contemporary relevance. The early Christian communities, many of them facing persecution under Roman rule, find in Isaiah's servant songs a theological framework for understanding how suffering can become redemptive rather than merely destructive. The prophet's vision of one who is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, provides meaning for their own experiences of rejection and hardship. When Roman authorities arrest Christian leaders, when families are torn apart by religious conversion, when believers face economic boycotts or social ostracism, they discover that Isaiah's 700-year-old words speak directly to their circumstances. The servant, who was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, becomes a model for maintaining faith under pressure. The Apostle Philip demonstrates this transformative power when he encounters an Ethiopian court official reading Isaiah 53 beside a desert road. "Do you understand what you are reading?" Philip asks. The Ethiopian replies, "How can I, unless someone guides me?" As Philip explains how the servant's suffering and resurrection have been fulfilled in Jesus, the Ethiopian immediately requests baptism, carrying Isaiah's message into the heart of Africa. This pattern repeats across the Mediterranean world. Isaiah's prophecies provide early Christians with vocabulary for expressing revolutionary concepts about divine love, sacrificial atonement, and universal salvation that transcend ethnic and cultural boundaries. The prophet's vision of nations streaming to divine wisdom and every knee bowing becomes the theological foundation for missionary expansion beyond Jewish communities. But Isaiah's transformative influence extends far beyond the first century. As Christianity spreads throughout the Roman Empire and eventually becomes the dominant religious tradition in Europe, Isaiah's words continue generating new applications and insights across changing historical circumstances. Medieval monastics, dedicating their lives to prayer and contemplation, find in Isaiah's visions of divine transcendence and intimate presence the spiritual framework for mystical experience. The prophet's description of seraphim crying, "Holy, holy, holy," becomes central to liturgical worship that will shape European culture for over 1,000 years. During the medieval period, when feudal systems create rigid social hierarchies and political power operates through force and intimidation, Isaiah's vision of the peaceable kingdom offers an alternative model of authority based on justice and mercy. A little child shall lead them, challenges assumptions about leadership and power that dominate medieval society. The Renaissance period witnesses renewed interest in Hebrew studies as Christian humanists seek to understand biblical texts in their original languages. This scholarly movement leads to fresh discoveries about Isaiah's poetic techniques and theological insights that had been obscured by centuries of translation. The prophet's sophisticated literary artistry earns recognition alongside classical authors like Homer and Virgil. The Protestant Reformation demonstrates Isaiah's continuing revolutionary potential when reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin find in the prophet's words ammunition for challenging ecclesiastical corruption and advocating for direct relationship between believers and God. Isaiah's critique of empty ritualism, or Esau's, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me," becomes a rallying cry for religious renewal. But perhaps nowhere does Isaiah's transformative power become more evident than in movements for social justice that emerge during the modern period. When European traders begin enslaving Africans for transportation to American plantations, creating economic systems based on human bondage, Isaiah's words become weapons in the hands of abolitionists. Frederick Douglass, himself an escaped slave who becomes one of America's most powerful orators, memorizes entire chapters of Isaiah and quotes them in speeches that expose the moral contradictions of American slavery. The prophet's command to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke provides theological justification for the Underground Railroad and anti-slavery resistance. Harriet Tubman, conducting enslaved people to freedom through dangerous journeys, finds courage in Isaiah's promise that, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you." The ancient words become contemporary, promises that sustain her through 19 rescue missions without losing a single person. The American Civil War, which ultimately ends legalized slavery, is understood by many participants as fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy that God will render to his enemies repayment. Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address draws heavily on Isaiah's themes of divine judgment and mercy, framing the national crisis as both punishment for collective sin and opportunity for moral renewal. The 20th century witnesses Isaiah's influence expanding into global movements for human rights and social transformation. Mahatma Gandhi, leading India's independence movement through non-violent resistance, finds in Isaiah's servant songs a model for redemptive suffering that transforms oppressors rather than merely defeating them. Gandhi's concept of satyagraha, IDEA, truth force or soul force, reflects Isaiah's vision of power that operates through moral authority rather than physical coercion. The Mention, the prophet's description of one who will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street, becomes Gandhi's template for leadership that influences through example rather than domination. Martin Luther King Jr. inherits both the African-American tradition of Isaiah interpretation and Gandhi's application of prophetic principles to social change. His "I Have a Dream" speech draws directly from Isaiah's vision of valleys being lifted up, mountains being made low, and crooked places being made straight. The prophet's promise that all flesh shall see the salvation of God becomes King's vision of racial reconciliation. King's letter from Birmingham jail quotes Isaiah extensively, using the prophet's words to explain why unjust laws must be resisted and how temporary suffering can produce permanent transformation. The ancient servant songs provide theological framework for understanding how voluntary acceptance of persecution can break cycles of violence and hatred. The civil rights movement's success in transforming American law and culture demonstrates Isaiah's continuing relevance for addressing systemic injustice. The prophet's vision of justice, rolling down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream, becomes reality through legislative changes that extend constitutional protections to previously excluded populations. International human rights movements also draw inspiration from Isaiah's universal vision. The prophet's declaration that God's house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples provides theological foundation for organizations like the United Nations, which seeks to establish principles of human dignity that transcend national, ethnic, and religious boundaries. Liberation theology movements in Latin America find in Isaiah's preferential option for the poor a divine mandate for challenging economic systems that concentrate wealth while marginalizing vulnerable populations. The prophet's promise to bring good news to the poor becomes justification for political activism aimed at structural change rather than merely charitable relief. Women's rights movements discover in Isaiah's prophecies about daughters prophesying and nations being led by divine wisdom, a theological basis for gender equality that challenges patriarchal traditions across multiple religious paresis. Communities. The prophet's vision of restored creation includes the empowerment of all people regardless of gender. Environmental movements find in Isaiah's vision of renewed creation, MA, where the desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus, both critique of human destructiveness and hope for ecological restoration. The prophet's promise of new heavens and new earth inspires contemporary efforts to address climate change and environmental degradation. The global AIDS crisis of the late 20th century brings fresh relevance to Isaiah's servant songs, as communities affected by the pandemic find in the prophet's description of one who is wounded for our transgressions and by whose stripes we are healed, a framework for understanding suffering that connects rather than isolates. Modern Israel's establishment as a nation draws heavily on Isaiah's prophecies about return from exile and restoration of Jerusalem. The prophet's vision of nations streaming to Zion for instruction provides theological framework for understanding contemporary Jewish experience, while raising complex questions about prophetic fulfillment and ongoing divine purpose. Each of these transformations demonstrates how Isaiah's words function not as static historical documents, but as living texts that generate new applications across changing circumstances. The prophet's vision of divine justice, redemptive suffering, and ultimate restoration provides vocabulary for expressing hope in situations that appear hopeless and finding meaning in experiences that seem meaningless. What makes this transformative power possible is the universal nature of human experiences that Isaiah addresses: oppression and liberation, suffering and healing, exile and homecoming, despair and hope. While specific historical contexts change dramatically across 27 centuries, the fundamental challenges of human existence remain remarkably consistent. Isaiah's prophecies speak to these perennial concerns with imagery and concepts that transcend cultural boundaries, while remaining concrete enough to provide practical guidance for specific situations. The result is a body of literature that continues generating new insights and applications for each generation that encounters it seriously. Tomorrow, we will explore how modern scholarship and technology are unlocking new dimensions of understanding within Isaiah's ancient words, revealing layers of meaning that previous generations could not have discovered. The 21st century has ushered in an unprecedented era of discovery within Isaiah's ancient prophecies. Technologies that the prophet could never have imagined now illuminate dimensions of his work that remained hidden for over 25 centuries. Like archaeologists uncovering buried cities, modern scholars use digital tools to excavate layers of meaning within text that previous generations read without recognizing their full complexity. Consider the revolutionary impact of computer-assisted textual analysis. When scholars feed Hebrew manuscripts into sophisticated software programs, patterns emerge that would be impossible to detect through traditional reading methods. The computer identifies recurring letter combinations, tracks the frequency of specific words across Isaiah's 40-year ministry, and maps the evolution of his vocabulary with mathematical precision. These analyses reveal that Isaiah's prophecies contain intricate acrostic structures woven through entire chapters, high S, hidden alphabetical patterns, where the first letters of successive verses or phrases follow the Hebrew alphabet in sequence. The human eye, reading at normal speed, cannot perceive these underlying frameworks, yet computer analysis makes them clearly visible. In Isaiah chapter 12, for instance, digital mapping reveals that the prophet has constructed his praise song according to alphabetical principles that create multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. The surface text proclaims thanksgiving for divine salvation, while the hidden acrostic structure reinforces themes of completeness and divine order through its systematic progression through Hebrew letters. But these discoveries represent only the beginning of what modern technology reveals about Isaiah's literary artistry. Comparative database analysis, drawing on thousands of ancient Near Eastern texts, illuminates how the prophet adapted and transformed conventional literary forms to express unprecedented theological concepts. When computers compare Isaiah's servant songs with similar compositions from Mesopotamian and Egyptian literature, they identify specific borrowings and innovations that reveal how the prophet's consciousness transformed familiar cultural materials into revolutionary spiritual insights. Isaiah takes standard ancient Near Eastern coronation, psalms, and royal inscriptions, then subverts their conventional meanings to describe a king who rules through suffering rather than conquest. Archaeological discoveries continue, providing dramatic confirmation of Isaiah's historical accuracy. Satellite imagery of ancient Jerusalem, combined with ground-penetrating radar and precision excavation techniques, has mapped the exact layout of the city during Isaiah's ministry. The prophet's geographical references, once dismissed by critics as anachronistic, proved to describe accurately the urban landscape of 8th century Jerusalem. The recent discovery of King Hezekiah's royal seal, bearing the inscription "Belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah," provides physical confirmation of the political figures who appear prominently in Isaiah's prophecies. Carbon dating places this artifact precisely within the period of Isaiah's ministry, validating the historical framework within which the prophet operated. Excavations at Lachish, one of Judah's major fortress cities, have uncovered dramatic evidence of the Assyrian siege that Isaiah predicted and witnessed. Assyrian siege ramps, built according to techniques described in contemporary military manuals, remain visible along the city's western approach. Arrowheads by the thousands, human remains showing evidence of violent death, and destruction layers precisely datable to 701 before Christ, all confirm the accuracy of Isaiah's descriptions of Assyrian military campaigns. Perhaps most remarkably, excavations have uncovered Assyrian palace reliefs from Nineveh that depict the siege of Lachish in extraordinary detail. These stone carvings, created by Assyrian artists to celebrate their military victory, show siege engines, defensive walls, and military techniques that correspond exactly to archaeological evidence found at Lachish itself. Isaiah witnessed these exact events, integrating them into his prophetic consciousness as examples of divine judgment and deliverance. Chemical analysis of Dead Sea Isaiah manuscripts reveals sophisticated preservation techniques that ensured textual stability across millennia. Spectroscopic examination of inks shows that ancient scribes used formulations specifically designed for longevity, incorporating metallic elements that bond permanently with parchment fibers. The result is text that remains as legible today as when it was first written 2,000 years ago. Carbon dating of parchment samples, combined with paleographic analysis of letter forms, confirms that the Great Isaiah Scroll was copied around 125 before Christ, exactly when scholars had predicted, based on historical evidence. This validation of traditional dating methods demonstrates the reliability of manuscript analysis techniques developed over centuries of careful scholarship. Linguistic analysis, using modern computational methods, has revolutionized understanding of Hebrew poetry's sophisticated literary techniques. Software programs can now identify chiastic structures, mirror image arrangements of words and phrases, that create complex patterns of meaning within Isaiah's prophecies. These structures, operating at multiple levels simultaneously, demonstrate literary artistry that rivals any work in world literature. Isaiah chapter 55, for example, contains a chiastic structure that spans the entire chapter, with words and themes in the first half mirrored precisely in the second half, all focusing on the central theme of God's Word, accomplishing its intended purpose. This discovery reveals that what appears to be spontaneous, prophetic utterance actually reflects careful literary construction that enhances meaning through structural beauty. Digital mapping of metaphorical language throughout Isaiah's prophecies shows how the prophet developed increasingly sophisticated imagery across his 4-decade ministry. Early prophecies use relatively conventional metaphors drawn from agricultural and military experience. Later prophecies create complex symbolic systems that interconnect multiple layers of meaning within single poetic units. The servant songs, subjected to detailed linguistic analysis, reveal vocabulary and grammatical structures that are unique within Hebrew literature. Isaiah appears to have invented new ways of expressing concepts about vicarious suffering and redemptive death that had no adequate precedent in Hebrew linguistic tradition. The prophet's theological innovations required linguistic innovations to express ideas that pushed beyond existing vocabulary. Comparative literary analysis, enabled by vast digital databases of ancient literature, shows how Isaiah's prophecies influenced subsequent Jewish and Christian writing in ways that were previously unrecognized. Computer algorithms can identify verbal parallels, thematic borrowings, and structural imitations across thousands of texts, revealing the extent of Isaiah's literary legacy. The New Testament, for instance, contains over 400 direct quotations or allusions to Isaiah, far more than any other Hebrew prophet. Digital analysis reveals that these references follow specific patterns, with different New Testament authors favoring particular aspects of Isaiah's theology. Matthew emphasizes Isaiah's prophecies about divine presence with humanity, while Paul focuses on the prophet's teachings about justification through faith. Archaeological excavations at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, have revealed the sophisticated scholarly community that preserved these manuscripts across centuries. The site contains scriptoriums, libraries, and copying facilities that demonstrate the high level of organization required for large-scale manuscript preservation. Pottery analysis shows that the clay jars used for manuscript storage were manufactured specifically for long-term preservation, with designs that maximized protection against moisture and temperature fluctuation. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from Qumran provides precise chronology for the community's existence, confirming that they occupied the site during the exact period when the earliest copies of Isaiah manuscripts were being produced. This correlation validates the manuscript dating and demonstrates the historical continuity of Hebrew scribal traditions. Modern translation techniques, enhanced by computer analysis of ancient languages, have identified nuances in Isaiah's Hebrew that previous generations of translators missed or misunderstood. Digital concordances, allowing instant comparison of word usage across thousands of biblical and extra-biblical texts, reveal that Isaiah employed technical vocabulary with greater precision than earlier scholars recognized. The prophet's use of legal terminology, for instance, shows sophisticated understanding of ancient Near Eastern court procedures. When Isaiah describes cosmic judgment scenes, he employs specific forensic language that evokes formal legal proceedings rather than arbitrary divine anger. This discovery adds layers of meaning to prophecies that were previously read as purely emotional or spiritual appeals. Environmental archaeology, RUZ, the study of ancient climate, agriculture, and ecology, has confirmed the accuracy of Isaiah's descriptions of Palestinian geography and agricultural cycles. Pollen analysis from lake sediments shows that the vegetation patterns described in Isaiah's metaphors correspond precisely to environmental conditions during the 8th century before Christ. The prophet's agricultural imagery, A.G. Sess, references to fig trees, vineyards, grain harvests, and seasonal cycles reflects intimate knowledge of Palestinian farming practices that archaeological evidence confirms as accurate for his historical period. These details, once considered mere poetic flourishes, now appear as evidence of Isaiah's genuine Palestinian origin and contemporary historical setting. Astronomical calculations based on Isaiah's chronological references have enabled scholars to establish precise dates for many of the prophet's specific prophecies. When Isaiah mentions eclipses, planetary alignments, or seasonal phenomena, modern astronomical software can calculate exactly when these events occurred, providing absolute dating for prophetic utterances that were previously dated only approximately. The convergence of multiple independent dating methods, archaeological, astronomical, linguistic, and historical, has created unprecedented confidence in the chronological framework of Isaiah's ministry. This precision enables much more sophisticated analysis of how the prophet's theological understanding developed across 4 decades of changing political circumstances. Digital humanities projects are now creating comprehensive databases that cross-reference every aspect of Isaiah studies, manuscript variants, archaeological discoveries, linguistic analysis, historical correlations, and comparative literature. These integrated resources enable research questions that would have been impossible to pursue using traditional methods. Graduate students can now search simultaneously across dozens of ancient languages, hundreds of archaeological sites, and thousands of manuscript variants to explore specific aspects of Isaiah's prophecies. The result is a new generation of scholarship that synthesizes evidence from multiple disciplines to achieve understanding that no single methodological approach could provide. Perhaps most significantly, these modern discoveries are validating rather than undermining traditional claims about Isaiah's historical accuracy and prophetic authenticity. Rather than revealing embarrassing anachronisms or contradictions, advanced analytical techniques consistently confirm that Isaiah's prophecies reflect genuine 8th century Palestinian origins while demonstrating literary and theological sophistication that exceeds previous estimates. The application of rigorous scientific methods to ancient texts, far from diminishing their religious significance, is revealing new dimensions of artistry and accuracy that enhance appreciation for the prophet's achievement. Modern tools are unlocking secrets that make Isaiah's prophecies more rather than less remarkable. Tomorrow, we will explore the most surprising discovery of all, how modern neuroscience has revealed the physiological mechanisms by which Isaiah's ancient poetry produces measurable effects on human brain chemistry, creating the profound sense of peace that millions of readers have experienced across 27 centuries. Modern neuroscience has made a remarkable discovery. Isaiah's ancient poetry functions as a sophisticated form of neurological medicine, activating specific brain networks that promote deep relaxation and restorative sleep. What millions of readers have experienced intuitively across 27 centuries can now be measured, mapped, and explained through precise scientific analysis. Consider what happens in your brain when you encounter Isaiah's opening words. "Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool." This simple invitation triggers a cascade of neurological responses that can be observed through functional magnetic resonance imaging. The brain's default mode network, AS, a collection of interconnected regions that activate during rest and introspection, immediately responds to Isaiah's contemplative language. This network, discovered only in the past 2 decades, includes the medial, prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus. When these regions synchronize their activity, the mind enters states associated with meditation, prayer, and peaceful reflection. Isaiah's 3-beat rhythm, fundamental to Hebrew poetry, synchronizes remarkably with optimal human breathing patterns. Hebrew verse typically follows a pattern of stressed syllables that naturally encourages inhalation and exhalation at intervals that activate the parasympathetic nervous system, MTU, the body's built-in relaxation response. When you read, "He makes me lie down in green pastures, he leads me beside still waters," your breathing automatically adjusts to the rhythmic pattern embedded in the Hebrew original. This synchronization triggers the vagus nerve, which signals the heart to slow its rate and the blood vessels to dilate, reducing blood pressure and creating physiological calm. Brainwave measurements reveal that Isaiah's imagery consistently produces theta waves, electrical patterns associated with the deepest stages of restorative sleep and the most beneficial forms of meditation. Theta frequencies, oscillating between 4 and 8 cycles per second, indicate that the brain has entered states where healing, memory consolidation, and stress recovery occur most effectively. The prophet's repeated use of water metaphors, still waters, flowing streams, rivers in the desert, activates neural networks specifically associated with thirst, satisfaction, and thermoregulation. These ancient survival circuits, located in the hypothalamus and brainstem, respond to water imagery by triggering relaxation responses that prepare the body for rest and recovery. Neurochemical analysis reveals that reading Isaiah's comfort passages releases measurable quantities of oxytocin and endorphins, the body's natural anxiety-reducing and pain-relieving compounds. Phrases like, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God," trigger the same neurochemical responses that occur during positive social bonding and physical embrace. The prophet's promise, "I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand," activates the brain's attachment system, producing oxytocin release that counteracts cortisol and other stress hormones. This neurochemical shift creates measurable reductions in anxiety, blood pressure, and muscle tension, while promoting feelings of safety and security. Isaiah's nature imagery demonstrates sophisticated understanding of what modern psychology calls attention restoration theory. Natural scenes, mountains, valleys, forests, rivers, activate brain networks that reduce mental fatigue and restore cognitive capacity. The prophet's landscapes of peace provide the exact type of mental environment that neuroscience has identified as most conducive to recovery from stress and overstimulation. "Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. Uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain." This geographical transformation metaphor triggers the brain's spatial processing networks, while simultaneously suggesting resolution of life's difficulties. The result is activation of both concrete visualization abilities and abstract problem-solving resources. Electroencephalography studies show that Isaiah's prophecies about transformation and restoration consistently produce alpha wave patterns, murmur, brain waves associated with relaxed alertness and creative insight. These frequencies, typically measuring between 8 and 12 cycles per second, indicate optimal states for learning, healing, and innovative thinking. The prophet's eagle imagery, IDT, "Those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles," activates the brain's motor cortex in ways that simulate actual physical soaring. Mirror neurons fire as if the reader were experiencing flight, creating embodied, sensations of freedom and elevation that counteract feelings of being trapped or overwhelmed. Functional brain imaging reveals that Isaiah's passages about divine care activate the same neural networks that respond to parental protection in childhood. The orbitofrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, regions associated with secure attachment, show increased activity when readers encounter promises like, "As one whom his mother comforts, so I will comfort you." This neurological response explains why Isaiah's comfort passages prove particularly effective for individuals dealing with trauma, grief, or abandonment. The ancient words provide neurochemical experiences of safety and nurture that help rewire brain circuits damaged by adverse experiences. Sleep studies conducted in laboratory settings demonstrate that individuals who read Isaiah before bedtime enter REM, sleep faster, and experience more restorative sleep cycles than control groups reading neutral text. The combination of rhythm, imagery, and emotional content in Isaiah's poetry appears optimally designed to prepare the nervous system for regenerative rest. The prophet's vision of the peaceable kingdom, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, activates brain regions associated with conflict resolution and social harmony. The anterior temporal cortex and superior temporal sulcus, which process social relationships and predict others' intentions, respond to these images by modeling peaceful coexistence. This neurological response creates measurable reductions in aggressive thoughts and defensive reactions. Individuals who regularly read Isaiah's peace passages show decreased activity in the amygdala, IMED, the brain's alarm system, IMED, when exposed to potentially threatening social situations. Linguistic analysis reveals that Isaiah's Hebrew employs specific sound patterns that optimize neurological relaxation. The prophet favors soft, consonants, long vowels, and melodic word combinations that require gentle breath control and relaxed vocal production. These phonetic choices create additional layers of calming influence beyond the semantic content of his words. Modern understanding of circadian rhythms illuminates why Isaiah's evening and morning passages prove particularly effective for sleep preparation and peaceful awakening. The prophet's timing-specific imagery, "Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes with the morning," aligns with natural hormonal cycles that govern sleep and wakefulness. Cortisol levels, which naturally peak in early morning and decline toward evening, respond measurably to Isaiah's dawn imagery. References to morning light, sunrise, and new beginnings trigger anticipatory neurochemical responses that help regulate healthy sleep-wake cycles even when read hours before actual sunrise. The prophet's garden imagery activates the brain's reward systems in ways that mirror responses to actual natural environments. Phrases about gardens watered by springs and trees planted by streams of water trigger dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens, the same neurochemical response that occurs during experiences of natural beauty. This finding explains why Isaiah's nature metaphors prove particularly effective for urban readers who lack regular access to natural environments. The ancient words provide neurochemical experiences of nature that help satisfy the brain's biological need for green spaces and growing things. Memory consolidation studies show that information processed while listening to Isaiah's poetry demonstrates enhanced retention and emotional integration. The combination of rhythmic language, positive imagery, and stress reduction creates optimal conditions for transforming temporary experiences into permanent, accessible memories. Brain connectivity analysis reveals that regular engagement with Isaiah's texts strengthens neural pathways between the prefrontal cortex and limbic system, HEMAM, connections crucial for emotional regulation and stress management. This neuroplasticity effect suggests that consistent reading of Isaiah's prophecies can create lasting improvements in mental health and emotional resilience. The prophet's emphasis on restoration and renewal appears to activate the brain's neurogenesis processes ESS port, the growth of new neural cells that continues throughout adult life. Passages about new heavens and new earth, and former things passing away, correlate with increased activity in the hippocampus, where new brain cells are generated and integrated into existing neural networks. Autonomic nervous system measurements show that Isaiah's promises about divine presence consistently activate the social engagement system identified by neuroscientist Stephen Porges. This neurological network, which includes the vagus nerve and facial muscles, regulates states of calm social connection that promote healing and growth. Thermal imaging studies reveal that reading Isaiah's comfort passages produces measurable increases in peripheral blood flow, particularly to hands and feet. This physiological warming effect, controlled by the autonomic nervous system, indicates deep relaxation and stress release that can persist for hours after reading. The prophet's vision of abundance, "You shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall break forth into singing," activates neural networks associated with positive expectations and optimistic future thinking. These cognitive patterns, centered in the prefrontal cortex, provide neurological foundations for hope and resilience. Pain perception studies conducted with chronic pain patients show that regular reading of Isaiah's healing passages produces measurable reductions in pain intensity and emotional distress. The neurological mechanisms involved include both direct analgesic effects from endorphin release and indirect benefits from reduced anxiety and improved sleep quality. The prophet's emphasis on light overcoming darkness activates brain circuits that respond to actual illumination, including the pineal gland's melatonin production systems. Reading passages about the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light can influence circadian rhythms and mood regulation, even in artificial lighting conditions. These scientific discoveries validate experiences that countless readers have reported across 27 centuries, that Isaiah's words possess unusual power to bring peace, comfort, and restorative rest. Modern neuroscience explains the mechanisms by which ancient poetry continues to provide therapeutic benefits that complement and sometimes exceed contemporary pharmaceutical interventions. The convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science reveals that Isaiah's prophecies function as sophisticated technologies for human flourishing, operating through neurological pathways that the prophet could not have understood consciously, yet somehow accessed intuitively through his transformed spiritual consciousness. Tomorrow, we will explore Isaiah's ultimate vision, prophecies that stretch beyond current human experience toward a transformed cosmos, where every broken system finds perfect repair, offering hope that transcends every temporary crisis while providing blueprints for the world that is yet to come. Isaiah's ultimate vision stretches beyond the boundaries of current human experience toward a transformed cosmos, where every broken system finds perfect repair. These are not merely beautiful dreams or wishful thinking, but blueprints for transformation that continue, inspiring visionaries, reformers, and dreamers 27 centuries after the prophet first glimpsed tomorrow's perfect world. Consider the breathtaking scope of Isaiah's final chapters, where the prophet's consciousness expands to encompass not just human history, but cosmic renewal itself. "For behold," he declares, "I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind." This is transformation at the most fundamental level, not merely repair of existing systems, but recreation of reality according to divine design. The prophet perceives that current creation, though beautiful and complex, operates under limitations that prevent full flourishing. Death constrains life, conflict disrupts harmony, scarcity creates competition, and misunderstanding divides communities that could otherwise cooperate. Isaiah's vision of new creation addresses each of these fundamental constraints through systematic restoration. No more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his days. Death loses its power to truncate human potential. Lives that current biology limits to decades extend across centuries, allowing full development of capabilities that barely begin to emerge in our present experience. But this longevity is not mere quantity of existence, or mayenne. It is quality transformation that makes extended life meaningful rather than burdensome. They shall not labor in vain, or bear children for calamity, for they shall be the offspring of the blessed of the Lord, and their descendants with them. Work becomes fulfilling rather than toilsome. Parenting brings joy rather than anxiety, and each generation builds upon previous achievements, rather than starting over from loss and confusion. This describes economic and social systems that operate according to principles of abundance rather than scarcity, cooperation rather than competition. Isaiah's peaceable kingdom represents perhaps the most radical transformation of all, the resolution of conflict at its biological roots. The wolf and the lamb shall graze together, the lion shall eat straw like the ox, and dust shall be the serpent's food. Predator-prey relationships that currently require death for a mind. Survival undergo fundamental alteration. This vision challenges our assumptions about the necessity of violence in natural systems. Current ecology depends on food chains, where some creatures must die to provide energy for others. Isaiah perceives renewed creation, where energy flows through different mechanisms that sustain all life without requiring death. The implications extend beyond animal behavior to human relationships. If biological systems can be transformed to eliminate predation, human social systems can certainly be redesigned to eliminate exploitation. The prophet's vision of swords becoming plowshares and spears becoming pruning hooks describes technology redirected from destruction to cultivation. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Military spending that currently consumes trillions of dollars annually gets redirected toward education, healthcare, environmental restoration, and exploration. Human ingenuity that now devises increasingly sophisticated weapons focuses instead on solving problems and creating beauty. But Isaiah's transformation vision operates through specific mechanisms rather than magical change. The key lies in universal access to divine knowledge. The earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. This describes an information revolution where wisdom becomes as accessible as breathing. Consider what this means practically. Current conflicts often arise from misunderstanding, misinformation, and competing narratives about truth. When accurate knowledge about divine purposes becomes universally available, the foundations for conflict disappear. People cannot remain enemies when they understand their fundamental unity and shared destiny. This knowledge saturation also eliminates the scarcity thinking that drives much human competition. When everyone understands that divine resources are inexhaustible and divine love is unconditional, the fear-based behaviors that create conflict lose their motivation. Hoarding becomes pointless when abundance is guaranteed. Isaiah describes the geographical transformation that accompanies social renewal. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. Environmental restoration occurs on a scale that current conservation efforts barely imagine. Ecosystems damaged by centuries of human exploitation undergo complete regeneration. Waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. Climate change reverses through mechanisms that operate more fundamentally than current technological solutions. The Earth's water cycle stabilizes in patterns that support maximum biological diversity and human flourishing. The prophet perceives urban transformation as well. Violence shall no more be heard in your land, devastation or destruction within. Your borders, you shall call your walls salvation, and your gates praise. Cities become centers of celebration rather than conflict. cooperation rather than crime. Architecture serves beauty and community rather than defense and separation. Gates that currently exist to keep people out instead welcome everyone in. Walls that now divide become gathering places for shared activities. The urban environment enhances human flourishing rather than complicating it. Transportation undergoes revolutionary change. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Way of Holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it. It shall belong to those who walk on the way. Even if they are fools, they shall not go astray. This describes transportation systems that are inherently safe, accessible to everyone, and impossible to misuse for harmful purposes. The phrase, even if they are fools, they shall not go astray, suggests that these systems operate with built-in guidance that prevents accidents and mistakes. Perhaps automated transportation networks, guided by artificial intelligence that prioritizes safety and efficiency above speed and individual control. Communication systems also transform according to Isaiah's vision. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Sensory limitations that currently restrict human communication disappear through technologies or biological restoration that provide full access to information for everyone. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. Physical limitations that currently prevent full participation in community life undergo complete healing. This could involve medical advances, technological assistance, or fundamental biological restoration, HUS. The mechanism matters less than the universal access it provides. Educational systems revolutionize according to Isaiah's model. All your children shall be taught by the Lord, and great shall be the peace of your children. Learning becomes direct, efficient, and personally fulfilling rather than competitive, stressful, and standardized. When divine wisdom provides the curriculum and teaching methods, education serves individual development rather than institutional requirements. Students learn at optimal rates using methods suited to their unique capabilities. Competition gives way to collaboration, as everyone understands that individual success enhances rather than threatens community welfare. Economic systems transform completely. You shall eat the good of the land becomes reality for everyone rather than privilege for a few. Resource distribution operates according to need and contribution rather than inherited advantage or political manipulation. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. Affordable housing and food security become universal rights rather than market commodities. Work provides dignity and fulfillment while meeting genuine human needs rather than creating artificial demand for unnecessary products. The prophet describes governance that operates through wisdom rather than power. I will make your overseers peace and your taskmasters righteousness. Political leadership serves community welfare rather than personal ambition or special interests. Leaders emerge through demonstrated wisdom and character rather than wealth, connections, or popularity. Decision-making processes prioritize long-term consequences and universal benefit rather than short-term gains for particular groups. Corruption becomes impossible when all motives and results remain transparently visible. Isaiah's justice vision addresses current inequalities systematically. Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Economic, political, and social systems that currently concentrate power and resources undergo complete restructuring. Wealth gaps that leave some in luxury, while others lack basic necessities, disappear through mechanisms that ensure everyone's fundamental needs are met before anyone's wants are satisfied. This is not enforced equality but freely chosen sharing that emerges from transformed understanding of human interdependence. The restoration includes psychological and spiritual healing. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. Trauma, depression, anxiety, and other forms of mental suffering receive effective treatment that addresses root causes rather than merely managing symptoms. Relationships damaged by misunderstanding, betrayal, and conflict undergo healing that restores trust and intimacy. Families divided by addiction, abuse, and abandonment find wholeness through processes that transform both individuals and systems. Perhaps most remarkably, Isaiah perceives that this transformation occurs not through external imposition, but through internal regeneration. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. Moral behavior emerges from genuine understanding rather than external compulsion. When people comprehend their fundamental unity and shared purpose, ethical choices become natural rather than burdensome. Laws become unnecessary, as everyone voluntarily chooses actions that benefit the whole community. Crime disappears because its motivations no longer exist. The prophet's vision of worship transformation reflects this internal change. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. Religious divisions that currently separate communities dissolve as everyone recognizes the same divine source working through diverse cultural expressions. Places of worship become centers of community cooperation rather than sectarian separation. Different traditions contribute their unique insights to shared understanding rather than competing for exclusive truth claims. Unity emerges through diversity rather than in spite of it. Isaiah's ultimate vision encompasses even death itself. He will swallow up death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces. This represents the final frontier of transformation. The biological limitations that currently constrain human existence undergo complete transcendence. Whether through medical advances that extend healthy life indefinitely, technological enhancement of human capabilities, or fundamental biological transformation, death loses its power to separate loved ones and truncate human potential. Life becomes the permanent condition rather than the temporary exception. This transformation timeline extends beyond current human experience, but provides direction for immediate action. Every step toward greater justice, peace, environmental restoration, and human flourishing participates in the ultimate transformation that Isaiah perceives as inevitable. The prophet's vision functions not as escapist fantasy, but as practical blueprint for communities willing to experiment with transformed principles. Small-scale implementations of Isaiah's ideals, PAR, intentional communities, cooperative economics, restorative justice programs, environmental restoration projects, demonstrate that transformation begins wherever people choose to embody alternative possibilities. Each generation that takes Isaiah's vision seriously moves human civilization closer to the ultimate transformation he describes. The prophet's words continue inspiring hope because they describe not impossible dreams but inevitable destiny, ROP, the world that emerges when human systems align with divine purposes rather than resist them. As you prepare for rest tonight, carried by Isaiah's promises toward peaceful sleep, you participate in the eternal rhythm of renewal that the prophet perceived as creation's ultimate direction. Tomorrow's perfect world takes shape wherever people choose to embody today the peace, justice, and love that will one day characterize all existence. Sweet dreams await those who trust in promises that transcend every temporary crisis, offering blueprints for transformation that continue inspiring visionaries 27 centuries after Isaiah first glimpsed the world that is yet to come.